Most men over 40 think they need 5 to 6 days a week in the gym to get in shape. But the truth is, that's the very reason they stay stuck looking the same month after month. You'll actually get fitter, stronger, and look younger with just 2 workouts a week. This isn't theory. It's the same 2 workout plan my dad followed at 53 and that dozens of busy fathers, professionals, entrepreneurs, and men just like you in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are using right now to build muscle, gain strength, and look younger. And in this video, I'm gonna walk you through those exact 2 workouts, the exercises, sets, and reps so you can finally stop guessing and follow a plan that works. So I call this the 2 workout, 2 set method. So fundamentally, you're going to train your full body twice a week. You're gonna have a workout A, which you're gonna do on Monday or Tuesday, and then you're gonna have a workout B, which you're gonna do on Thursday or Friday. The idea is to leave 72 hours between sessions. Within each workout, you're gonna have 3 compound exercises and then 3 isolation exercises. So compound exercises are multi-joint, multi-muscle movements, and these are your bread and butter exercises, the movements that are gonna pack on the most muscle and strength onto your body. These are gonna be responsible for 80 to 90% of the muscle and strength that you're capable of gaining, and that's also why we start with them first. They're also the more strenuous movements, and so that's why you wanna start with those compound exercises, and then you wanna finish off with the isolation exercises, which are single joint, single muscle movements that exist to plug the gaps left by the compound exercises and bring up weak points. So an example of a compound exercise could be squats or bench presses or deadlifts. Examples of isolation exercises could be bicep curls, lateral raises, calf raises. Now here's why this works so well for men over 40. The first reason is recovery. When you train just twice a week, you can recover fully between workouts. Reason number 2, intensity. When you train only twice a week, you can actually push really hard in those workouts and stimulate more muscle growth because you're going into your workouts fresh and recovered, as opposed to going into your workouts tired and fatigued and just going through the motions. Third reason is progress. When you follow this setup, you'll actually progress faster in terms of your strength because you're not burnt out all the time. You're going into your workouts fresh, and that allows you to get consistently stronger week by week. Fourth reason is sustainability. Working out twice a week is incredibly sustainable, so you'll actually stick to it long term. So I have clients that come to me all the time and tell me, Rio, before your 2-day per week system, I could never stay consistent with weight training. Before, I was trying to train 5 to 6 days a week and I was constantly falling off because it didn't fit into my lifestyle. So working out twice a week is sustainable no matter how busy you are. Everybody has 2 hours per week to dedicate to the gym, and ultimately the goal is to stay consistent. That's the key ingredient for success, and consistency stems from sustainability. Now this isn't some gimmick. This is how men trained in the pre-steroid era, in the 40s and 50s, when the bodies that you saw were a product of sound fitness practices rather than drug abuse like the bodies that you see today. So men understood back then that when you are not blasting metric shitloads of steroids, you actually have to train less because your body cannot recover as fast without steroids, right? When you're natural. And so they actually built their physiques training just 2 to 3 times per week on full body routines like this. Examples of men you might know who followed this sort of system would be guys like Reg Park or Steve Reeves or John Grimmick. Now the best part of this system is that it frees you up to actually live your life, to spend time with your kids, to focus on your career, to pursue other hobbies, and still look better than men half your age. You're not chained to the gym with this system. You're going about fitness in a way that actually enhances your life, not consumes it. So now that you understand the structure of the routine and the philosophy behind it, let's talk about how to choose the exercises that are going to go into that routine. By the way, if you're over 40 and serious about dropping fat and building muscle, I just opened my new 8-week Lean and Strong challenge. So here's how it works. You put down $500, follow a few simple rules like hitting 2 workouts a week, logging your food, and checking in with me. And if you follow the rules, you win your $500 back as store credit to keep going. So best case, you follow through, get results, and roll that credit into bigger goals. Worst case, you still walk away with 8 weeks of structure, accountability, and real progress. So spots are limited and they're first come, first serve, and the price goes up $100 every 10 signups. So click the link in my description now to grab your spot. So to pick your exercises, I use an exercise selection framework called the Core 6. Now, the Core 6 is an exercise selection framework that completely cuts through the noise and makes choosing the exercises that you're going to focus on to build muscle and strength very systematized and very methodical. So the Core 6 stems from the idea that there are 6 core movement patterns that exist for us human beings. We have squats, hip hinges, vertical pushes, vertical pulls, horizontal pushes, and horizontal pulls. In other words, a squatting movement of some kind of deadlift, some kind of overhead press, some kind of, pull up or chin up or lat pull down, some sort of chest press, and then some sort of rowing movement. And so the idea with the core 6 is that you literally just want to find a variation of each of these movement patterns, like an exercise for each of them, that works really, really well for you, and then make those like the crux of your workout routine. Make those like the foundational exercises that you're gonna strive to master and get really, really strong at over time. And I promise you, the reason why this framework is so powerful is because if you pick a movement for each of these and then you get really strong at it over time, you are guaranteed to build an amazing body. You are guaranteed to pack on significant muscle and strength. In fact, the quality of your physique will always be in direct proportion to how strong you get at the exercises that you choose for these movement patterns. That is literally your Polaris star when it comes to weight training and building your physique. Like, these are the movements that you really want to focus on, okay? So now I'll give you some examples of exercises that fit within these movement patterns, because believe it or not, one size doesn't really fit all. There are some exercises that work well for some people and don't work for other people. And so I'm very much of the opinion that exercises are just tools in your toolbox as a lifter. There's no like one exercise that is mandatory. There are multiple exercises that work really well for each of these different movement patterns. And your job is to find out which one does work really well for you and then stick with that for a very long time. So as far as squats, we have barbell squats, leg presses, hack squats, etc. There are more movements. You can do hip belt squats, you can do Bulgarian split squats. The options are endless. As far as hip hinges, you can do Romanian deadlifts, you can do conventional deadlifts, you can do stiff-legged deadlifts, and if deadlifts don't work for you in general, you could do a hamstring curl. As far as vertical pushes, you could do a dumbbell overhead press, seated or standing. I recommend seated. You could do barbell overhead presses, you could do machine overhead presses. For vertical pulls, you can do chin-ups, pull-ups, or lat pull-downs. For horizontal pushes, you could do barbell chest presses, either incline or flat. Do dumbbell presses, incline or flat, or you could do machine press. For horizontal pulls, you can do barbell rows, dumbbell rows, or machine rows. And like I said, one size doesn't fit all, so don't feel like there's any exercises on here that are mandatory for you to do. You want to pick the ones that work really well for you. I'll give you some examples. So one of my clients, Daniel, who's 62 years old, for a while, for his squatting movement, he was doing leg presses, and for his hip hinge, he was doing Romanian deadlifts. Because he has lower back arthritis, we found that those movements actually aggravated his lower back pain. So we switched him to doing different movements. For his hip hinge, we switched him to doing hamstring curls. For his squatting movement, we switched him to doing Bulgarian split squats. I have a client, Sergio, who's also 62. He was doing RDLs for his primary hip hinge movement, and no matter how good we got his form, that exercise just always tweaked his lower back, so we switched him to doing hamstring curls. I have a client, Michael, who was doing barbell chest pressing as his primary chest exercise, but he had previous shoulder injuries that was being aggravated by the barbell pressing, so we switched him to doing incline dumbbell bench pressing, and it fixed the issue. So that's how you pick your core 6 movements. And if you remember back to the routine structure that I showed you, and by the way, I'm going to give you an example of a full routine in just a minute. If you remember back to that structure, you had the 3 compound exercises in each session, your workout A and your workout B. So basically, all we're going to do is then go back to the routine, and we're just going to split these up. So 3 of these are going to go in your workout A, and the other 3 are going to go into your workout B. Now, as far as how to pick the isolation exercises, because remember, the final 3 exercises of each routine are going to be isolation exercises, single joint movements that are there to plug the gaps, the weak points that might be left by these movements. So in terms of how to pick the isolation exercises, you don't really need like a framework like this. You just want to look at your physique and you want to ask yourself, like, what like small muscle groups are not being hit that hard through these big exercises? What do I feel is lagging behind? What are some muscle groups I'd really like to bring up? So some examples of common isolation exercises, like ones that I'd probably recommend that you include, would be bicep curls, tricep extensions, calf raises, neck curls, face pulls, and ab work. You really don't need to obsess that much over the isolation exercises because again, they're just the icing on top of the cake. They're just there to plug the gaps left by these movements. These are your bread and butter. Like these are the movements, not all of them. Once again, like one for each of these. That's the core 6 that you really want to master and get really strong at over time. I cannot stress that enough. Like this is what I do for my clients. We pick their core 6 based on what works really well for them, and then we just have them master those movements and get really strong at them over time. That's what's going to build your physique, I promise you. And then the isolation exercises are just there to like sprinkle in based on your weak points, and that's really it. That's how you pick your exercises. It's very simple. So now we're gonna go back to the initial structure that I showed you and actually create the routine using the exercises that we just picked. So I'm gonna show you an example. So again, you're gonna have a workout A and then a workout B. Then you're gonna have your 6 exercises. So the first thing that we're gonna start by doing is placing the core 6. So remember, we picked 6 core exercises and we're literally just going to split those up into 3 per routine. So the way that I like to do it is that on your workout A, I like to do the squatting movement, the vertical pull, the vertical push, and then the 3 isolation exercises. And then the workout B, I like to do the horizontal push, the hip hinge, the horizontal pull, and then the isolation exercises. I'll give you an example. So let's say that on your workout A for your first exercise, for your squatting movement, you're gonna do barbell back squats. Then you're gonna do chin-ups. Then you're gonna do dumbbell overhead presses. Then for the isolation movements, you're gonna do tricep extensions, calf raises, and face pulls. And then on your workout B, your first exercise is gonna be your horizontal push. And so you're gonna do the incline dumbbell bench press. Then you're gonna do Romanian deadlifts. Then you're gonna do barbell rows. And for your isolation exercises, you're gonna do bicep curls, lateral raises, and then some direct ab work. So now you have the full routine and you know exactly what exercises you're going to do in those workouts. So now we need to cover how to actually perform the exercises in terms of sets, reps, training styles, rest times, and how to warm up. So the first thing we'll talk about is sets. For all those exercises, I recommend doing just 2 working sets per exercise. Now that might seem like too little, but let me explain why 2 working sets is actually the sweet spot for building muscle and strength over 40. So fundamentally, the reason why you want to do just 2 sets per exercise is so that you can train harder on your sets. So there's a saying by a guy named Arthur Jones, who was the mentor of Mike Mentzer. He was one of the pioneers of effective weight training. And he had a saying where you can either train long or you can train hard, but you can't do both. And so what he understood is that there's a trade-off in weight training between volume and intensity. Volume being the number of exercises and sets that you do, and intensity being how hard you train. So if you do a lot of volume, you do a lot of sets, you can't train as hard. But if you do less volume, you can increase your intensity and you can train harder. And this is always the more productive path in weight training because quality is always more important than quantity. In other words, how hard you train is much more important than how much training you do. And so a lot of people do like 4 or 5 sets per exercise. And what they end up doing is that all of their sets are done with like, let's say 60% effort. So basically what happens is that they're doing lots of sets, but they're going through the motions in those sets and they're not pushing them hard enough to actually stimulate growth. They're usually leaving like 3 to 5 reps in the tank and not pushing close to failure. And that's probably something that you're not even aware of if it's what you're doing right now, because this is something that happens subconsciously. When you know you have to do like 4 to 5 sets for an exercise, you subconsciously hold back because you're like, shit, I've got 5 sets to get through. I've got 4 sets to get through. I better conserve my energy. I better conserve my intensity. A lot of you guys don't even know that this is happening because it's happening on a subconscious level. And so you're actually not pushing your sets very hard. Now, if you do just 2 sets for an exercise, you're going to dump 100% effort into those 2 sets. And so sure, you're doing fewer sets, but you're actually making them count because you're not going into them thinking like, oh shit, I've got a ton of sets to get through. It's the opposite mindset. You're going into it thinking like, oh, I've got very few sets to get through. I really need to make these count if I want to gain muscle. And that's actually a much more productive mindset to go into training with because remember, training hard is what counts. Training close to failure, pushing your sets close to failure is what actually stimulates growth. The actual like duration and the quantity of your training is actually kind of irrelevant. So now let's talk about reps. So when it comes to the amount of reps that you're going to be doing per set, I'm going to go ahead and recommend that for compound exercises, you do between 6 to 12. That's the rep range that you sort of want to be in for compound exercises. And then for isolation exercises, you're going to be anywhere from like 8 to 20 reps depending on the exercise. Now, it's really important to note that there's no such thing as like a magic rep number. Anything between 5 and 20 reps is really good for building muscle. What's much more important is that you're actually pushing the sets hard in terms of pushing them close to failure and progressively overloading them over time in terms of adding weight to them over time. Those are the things that matter a lot more than the actual rep count. It's just that I've found that with compound exercises, this is sort of a sweet spot. Because when you're like, you don't want to be doing like 15 to 20 rep sets of like squats or deadlifts. I mean, you could, but it's going to be very, very painful. I find for movements where you're really focusing on trying to gain strength, which you should be on your compound movements, staying in a more moderate rep range is really good. And then for isolation exercises, you want to be a bit higher in reps because you don't want to be doing sets of like 5 on lateral raises or bicep curls. It's just, it doesn't really work that well. So this is a general guideline in terms of how many reps you should be doing per set on the different exercises. But now I actually want to give you something a little bit more specific, something a bit more tactical that you can actually put into action. So I want to tell you about a training style that I use to conduct the sets. I call it the Polarity training style. So as you can recall, you're going to be doing just 2 sets per exercise. Now, there are multiple different ways that people like to go about conducting their sets. Some people like to do straight sets across where they use the same weight on every set. Some people like to do pyramid training where they start light and then work their way up. I prefer to actually flip the script and do something a little bit different. I prefer to start with the heavy set first and then finish with a lighter back down set. So it's 1 heavy set, 1 lighter set for a total of 2 sets. And what I like to do is I like to go a little bit lower in reps on the first set and then a little bit higher in reps on the second set. So this is how it would look. So let's say you're doing the 2 sets. On the first set, you might do 6 to 8 reps, then you'd rest and then you take off maybe 10% of that weight. And then on the second set, you'd go for 8 to 10 reps. This works really well because I find when you're doing things like straight sets where you use the same weight across every set, what happens is that you kind of hold yourself back a little bit because you know you have to do that same weight over and over again. Whereas with this training style, you know that you only have to do that heavy set once. So you pour maximum focus and intensity into that set. And then you know, okay, you can go a little bit lighter, you can ease off a little bit. That's what I really love about this training style. It makes a lot of sense because the first set is always the most important set. And that's the one that you really want to give maximum effort and focus to. You do not want to go into that set thinking like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to do this again. And you hold back your energy, your intensity. You want to pour maximum effort into this. And then the reality is that if you do pour maximum effort into this, it's very unlikely that you will be able to replicate that same performance. So what this does, like taking the weight off, sort of accommodates that performance drop off that is very natural in training. So you do that heavy set, you take 10% off, and then you go a little bit lighter, and then you go for a couple more reps. Now, this is what I would recommend for your core 6, your big compound exercises, the first 3 exercises of each routine that we just talked about. Now, for the isolation exercises, this isn't really necessary because you're not gonna be going that heavy. You're not gonna be going like that intense to the point where you're gonna have to take weight off. If you want to do this on the isolation exercises, that's completely fine. In fact, sometimes I do it if I push like a set really hard on the isolation exercises, and then I feel like I need to take some weight off in order to stay within like the rep target that I'm going for, I will absolutely do that. But a lot of times for isolation exercises, I just do straight sets. Straight sets are literally just where you use the same weight on every set, and I find it works well for most isolation exercises. So an example of that is like, let's say you're doing bicep curls, you would literally just do 2 sets of 8 to 10 reps, and you would use the same weight on both of those sets, basically. It's really simple. Now, obviously, between these sets, you're going to need to rest. So the question is, how long should you rest? Well, for compound exercises, I recommend resting between 3 to 5 minutes. I see way too many men over 40 trying to rush to get through their sets, and they never rest long enough between them. A lot of men rest like 30 seconds to a minute between sets of their compound exercises. And that's honestly ridiculous. It's kind of a waste of training because if you're doing a really heavy set of squats, for example, you're not going to be able to recover from that in 30 seconds. You're gonna need more rest time in order to be able to actually make that second set worth doing. Right? So like if you do a set of squats and then you jump straight into another set, that second set is going to be garbage because you're going to be trashed. Whereas if you rest like 3 to 5 minutes, you actually allow yourself to recuperate, you'll be able to actually bring some good effort into that second set. And so a lot of guys are just doing so much junk volume. It's better to do fewer sets, but actually rest long between them than to try and squeeze like 4 to 5 sets in. That's really not productive. So the whole idea is that you just want to rest long enough to where you can replicate the same performance of the previous set. Now, obviously, like you're not going to be able to do that completely, especially if you're following this training style, but as much as possible, you want to be able to bring the same level of intensity. And so for a lot of like upper body compound movements, usually 3 minutes is fine, like bench presses, chin-ups, overhead presses. But for like heavy leg movements like leg press, squats, deadlifts, usually you're going to need closer to 5 minutes between sets. Now, for isolation exercises, it's a little bit different. You only need like 1 to 2 minutes because these movements are just not very strenuous. They don't work as much muscle mass and you can recover from them pretty quickly. So now let's talk about how to warm up for these sets. So you'll only ever have to actually warm up for the first couple exercises of your routine, aka the compound exercises. You do not need to warm up for your isolation exercises at the end of the routines because by then you will already be warm. And so the way that I like to warm up is I don't like to do general warm-ups where you walk on the treadmill, break a sweat, you do this long drawn out warm-up routine. I think that's completely unnecessary. What I like to do is specific warm-ups, and specific warm-ups is literally where you just do a couple light sets of the given exercise that you're trying to get into, where you ramp up to the first heavy set. So remember, you're going to be doing that polarity training style for the compound movements, which is going to have you do your heavy set first and then your second set lighter. So when it comes to warming up, all you want to do is look at what weight you're using for that first set and then just do percentages of that weight. So basically what you would do is for your first warm-up set, you do 50% of your first working set weight for 6 reps. And then for your second warm-up set, you might do 70% of your first working set weight for 3 reps. Now, usually 2 sets is all you need, but warming up is something that is very individual. Some people need more warming up, some people need less. The idea is just to do the minimum amount of warming up that you need to get into your working sets, right? The whole idea with warming up is we're just trying to get some blood flowing, get things loose, and get us psychologically prepared to actually move some heavy weight. Because if you just go straight into your first working set, it's gonna feel really, really difficult. So you wanna slowly work your way up, right? So if you're someone who needs a third warm-up set, what I'd recommend is doing 80% of your first working set weight for 1 rep. Now, between these warm-up sets, you do not need to rest. But once you have finished your warm-up sets, I'd recommend taking a full 3 minutes of rest and then getting into your working sets. So now you have the entire routine structure, you know what exercises you're gonna do in those routines, and you know how to actually perform the exercises in terms of the sets, reps, rest time, warm up, and so on. Now, what you need to understand is how to progress. And so everything that we just talked about is kind of useless without this piece. You need to have a system in place to make sure that you're getting stronger over time. And so the system that I would recommend is called the double progression method. So the double progression method is a strength progression method that involves working up in reps and then adding weight. So if you recall, let's say that we take this example of you're doing 2 sets, 6 to 8 on the first one, and then 8 to 10 on the second. So you might have noticed that there are rep ranges here instead of just one specific rep target. And the reason that range exists is to guide the progression. So basically the way that this works is, let's say you're going into your first workout after watching this video and you're gonna apply this whole thing that I just told you. Well, let's say that you're going into doing squats and you're gonna use 200 pounds on that first workout. If you're doing your first set, you're gonna try to get 6. Now on the next workout, the following week, you're still gonna be at 200 pounds, but you're gonna try to get 7 reps. You're gonna try and add a rep, right? To progressively overload it, to get stronger. And then on the following week, on the third week, you're still gonna be with 200 pounds, but you're going to try to get 8 reps. Now, this is the interesting thing. Once you hit 8 reps, you've hit the top end of the rep range. And it's at this point where you wanna add a little bit of weight, usually 5 pounds. So in the fourth workout, you're then going to go up to 205 pounds. And then you're gonna try to get 6, right? So you're gonna drop to the bottom of the rep range again, because usually adding 5 pounds yields about a 2 rep decrease. And then literally, you're gonna repeat this process again. You're gonna be with 205 on the next workout, and then you're gonna try to get 7, then you're gonna try to get 8 after that, and that's basically how the double progression method works. You're always progressing with either reps or weight, and you're going to apply that to every single set that you do. Now, it's really important to note that I made this look very linear here, but that's usually not how it works in reality. You might have weeks where you're stuck at, let's say, like 200 pounds for 7 for like 2 or 3 weeks. That's completely normal. Don't freak out. You might be able to make this sort of like linear progress when you're first getting into this, but over time it's going to slow down. You're not going to see this quickly of an increase. Honestly, I have a lot of clients who do. Because my system is so effective, it gives you enough recovery time to actually gain strength consistently. So you will see probably very rapid gains with this, especially if you've been training like 5 to 6 days a week on a shitty program. You're gonna see really quick gains when you start this out, but over time, it's important to understand that like this is gonna take time. This is not like a quick process. Trying to rush this process is how you get injured. So take it slow and just focus on striving for strength gains. That's what really counts. If you enjoyed this video, then you're gonna love this video right here where I go deeper into the 2 workout, 2 set method.